The Roman army, Exercitus Romanus in Latin, was the military backbone of ancient Rome, serving not only as a tool of conquest and defense, but also as a key pillar of Roman society and governance. It remained in continuous service across the three major phases of Roman history: the Roman Kingdom, the Roman Republic, and the Roman Empire, including both the Western and Eastern Byzantine empires. Over its remarkable lifespan of approximately 2,206 years, the Roman military evolved through countless changes in its size, composition, organizational structure, weaponry, and tactical doctrines. Despite these many transformations, the Roman army preserved a core set of traditions and military principles that reflected the enduring spirit and discipline of Roman martial culture. Its adaptability and resilience played a crucial role in shaping one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in world history. The Roman legion, Latin legio, was the largest military unit within the Roman army, made up primarily of Roman citizens who served as legionaries. During the era of the Roman Republic, a typical manipular legion consisted of about 4,200 infantry soldiers and 300 cavalrymen. However, after the Marian reforms introduced in 107 BC, the structure of the legion changed significantly. The reformed legion now comprised approximately 5,200 troops and was organized into 10 cohorts, with the first cohort having twice the number of soldiers as the others. This configuration remained standard throughout the Principate period and into the middle phase of the empire, until further military reforms in the 4th century introduced smaller units of around 1,000 soldiers each. The size of a Roman legion changed significantly over the course of ancient Rome's history. During the Republic, a standard legion consisted of around 4,200 infantry and 300 cavalry, equites, the latter drawn from the wealthier classes, as all soldiers were responsible for providing their own equipment at that time. In the imperial period, the typical legion grew to about 5,500 men and was generally commanded by a Roman imperial legate. From the late Republic through Julius Caesar's era, a legion usually consisted of 4,800 infantrymen, organized into 10 cohorts, each made up of 6 centuries of 80 men. Under the empire, this structure expanded slightly to include 5,280 legionaries plus 120 auxiliary troops. These legions were also split into 10 cohorts, 9 with 480 men, and a first cohort that was nearly double strength, around 800 soldiers. These numbers reflect actual field strength, while official paper strength was often higher, sometimes listed as 600 per cohort and 1,200 for the first. In the early days of the Roman kingdom, the term legion may have simply referred to the entire Roman military force, although sources from this period are sparse and unreliable. As the Roman state evolved, so did the structure of its legions, though they typically comprised roughly 5,000 troops. During much of the Republican era, legions were organized into 3 lines of 10 maniples each. From around 100 BC, in both the late Republic and early Empire, the legion was divided into 10 cohorts, each composed of 5 or 6 centuries. A small cavalry contingent, or ala, was also attached to each legion. By the 3rd century AD, legions had shrunk in size to about 1,000 to 1,500 soldiers, but the overall number of legions increased. In the 4th century, Eastern Roman frontier legions, limitanae, may have been even smaller. The organization and structure of the Republican legion likely drew influence from the Greek and Macedonian phalanx formations, reflecting the military ideas of earlier Mediterranean powers. Throughout most of the Roman imperial era, the legions represented the core of Rome's elite heavy infantry and were composed solely of Roman citizens. The rest of the army was made up of auxiliary forces, largely recruited from the provinces. These auxiliaries provided essential support, including the bulk of Rome's cavalry and additional infantry. Serving in the auxiliaries offered a pathway to Roman citizenship, which was granted upon honorable discharge. Interestingly, during much of the empire, Auxiliaries actually outnumbered legionaries in the Roman military structure. Many legions established before 40 BC continued to exist well into the later centuries of the empire. One prominent example is Legio IV Macedonica, originally formed by Augustus in 43 BC. Remarkably, it was still active in Egypt during the 7th century at the time of the Islamic conquest. However, not all legions had such lasting fates. The 17th, 18th, and 19th legions, all created around 41 BC under Augustus, met a tragic end. They were annihilated by a coalition of Germanic tribes led by Arminius during the catastrophic Varian disaster, Teutoburg Forest, on September 9th, AD 9. Following this defeat, Rome chose never to reconstitute these legions. Before 550 BC, there was no centralized Roman army. Instead, Rome relied on independent clan-based warbands that only came together as a unified force during times of serious external threat. Around 550 BC, during the reign of the king traditionally identified as Servius Tullius, a major reform appears to have taken place. A universal conscription of eligible adult male citizens was introduced. This shift seems to have aligned with the adoption of heavy armor for the majority of the infantry. Despite its initially limited numbers, this early Roman infantry proved to be highly effective and pioneered several significant military tactics. The foundational Roman military system was built on a mandatory levy of adult male citizens. This draft was conducted at the beginning of each campaign season, in years when warfare was expected. At this stage, Rome had no permanent or professional army. During the monarchy, up to about 500 BC, the standard levy likely consisted of 9,000 men. 6,000 heavily armored foot soldiers, probably organized as Greek-style hoplites. 2,400 lightly armed troops, rorarii, later known as velites, and 600 light cavalry, called equites celeres. After the monarchy ended and two annually elected praetors replaced the kings around 500 BC, this military structure remained but was split evenly between the two praetors, each in command of a legion of 4,500 men. The hoplite-style troops were probably arranged in a Greek-style phalanx during major battles. However, such large engagements were infrequent. Most combat took the form of smaller skirmishes and border raids. In these cases, the Romans typically fought in their fundamental tactical unit, the centuria, made up of roughly 100 men. Clan-based war bands continued to exist until at least 450 BC, although they nominally operated under the authority of the praetors. In 493 BC, not long after the foundation of the Roman Republic, Rome signed a lasting military alliance known as the Foedus Cassianum with the other Latin city-states. This agreement, likely driven by the need to mount a united defense against attacks from neighboring hill tribes, stipulated that all members would contribute equal forces for military campaigns under joint leadership. This alliance remained active until 358 BC. In the Republic, legions had an ephemeral existence, except for Legio I to IV, which were the consular armies, 2 per consul. Other units were levied by campaign. Rome's Italian allies were required to provide approximately 10 cohorts. Auxilia were not organized into legions to support each Roman legion. In the middle of the Republic, legions were composed of the following units: cavalry, equites. Originally the most prestigious arm, the cavalry attracted wealthy young Romans eager to prove their skill and launch political careers. Each horseman bought his own equipment: round shield, helmet, body armor, sword, and 1 or more lances. Cavalrymen were few in number, about 300 per legion, grouped into 10 turmi of 30 riders led by decurions. In addition to heavy horse, the army included lighter cavalry drawn from poorer citizens and youths not yet old enough for the hastati or equites. On the field, Roman cavalry disrupted enemy infantry, flanked opposing lines, and countered hostile horsemen, sometimes dismounting to fight on foot for greater stability before the stirrups invention. Light infantry, velites. Drawn largely from poorer citizens unable to afford full kit, The velites served as skirmishers. They opened battle by hurling javelins, harassing the foe or screening maneuvers behind them, then slipped back through the gaps between maniples. Because early and mid-Republican forces had limited cavalry, velites also doubled as scouts. Their organization was informal, and they fought in loose order. Heavy infantry. Forming the legion's backbone, heavy infantrymen were citizen soldiers who could purchase bronze helmets, shields, armor, swords, and the pilum, a heavy javelin effective to about 30 meters. After the Second Punic War, the short sword, gladius, became standard for the hastati and principes. Even their hobnailed sandals, caligae, proved deadly against fallen foes. Heavy infantry were arrayed in 3 ranks by experience. Hastati, the newest, least seasoned troops, stood in the front line. Placing green soldiers forward limited losses of veterans and gave rookies a chance to earn experience, while the men behind them stiffened their resolve if nerves failed. Principes, more seasoned fighters, often better equipped, held the second line and stepped in if the hastati faltered. Triarii, hardened veterans, acted as a last reserve. Kneeling when idle, they carried long hastae, spears, and fought in a phalanx. Their advance could halt a pursuing enemy, hence the Roman saying ad triarios redice, to fall back on the triarii, for a final resort. Each of these 3 lines was subdivided into usually 10 chief tactical units called maniples. A maniple consisted of 2 centuries and was commanded by the senior of the 2 centurions. At this time, each century of hastati and principes consisted of 60 men. A century of triarii was 30 men. These 3,000 men, 20 maniples of 120 men, and 10 maniples of 60 men, together with about 1,200 velites and 300 cavalry, gave the mid-Republican manipular legion a nominal strength of about 4,500 men. Each century within the Roman legion had its own unique standard and was composed of 10 smaller groups called contubernia. Each contubernium consisted of 8 soldiers who shared living quarters, 1 tent, along with communal supplies such as a cooking pot, a millstone for grinding grain, and a pack mule. Over time, full Roman citizenship was extended to all regions of Italy. Alongside this expansion, the earlier tripartite division of heavy infantry, hastati, principes, and triarii, was phased out and replaced by a standardized infantry model, primarily inspired by the former principes. These soldiers were uniformly equipped with 2 heavy javelins, piela, the short stabbing sword, gladius, chainmail armor, lorica hamata, a helmet, and the rectangular shield, scutum. The role once played by allied legions gradually shifted to that of the auxiliary forces auxilia, which were made up of non-citizens and provincial recruits. These auxiliaries included specialist personnel, immunes such as engineers, artillery operators, blacksmiths, construction crews, and support staff, as well as irregular troops, mercenaries, and local militias. Auxiliary units were usually organized as complete formations, including light infantry, skirmishers, velites, laborers, and light cavalry. Among them were also speculatores, a small team of mounted scouts used for reconnaissance, message delivery, and what might be considered early military intelligence. A typical legion during this period fielded around 5,120 legionaries, not including a large entourage of camp followers, servants, and slaves. When auxiliaries were added, the total fighting force could reach up to 11,000 men. In the later Roman Empire, legions were intentionally reduced in size to about 1,000 soldiers for logistical efficiency and to allow more units to cover Rome's extensive borders. Campaign losses also caused fluctuating troop numbers. Julius Caesar's legions in Gaul, for example, often had just 3,500 men due to battle attrition. Tactically, Roman methods remained largely consistent with earlier practices, but their effectiveness improved considerably thanks to intensive professional training and experience. During the late Republic, legions gained significant political influence. By the 1st century BC, the danger of a general commanding loyal legions for personal power became clear. Roman law prohibited governors from leaving their assigned provinces with their troops. Julius Caesar famously violated this rule in 49 BC when he left Gaul, crossed the Rubicon River, and entered Italy with his army, an act that triggered a constitutional crisis. The resulting civil wars ultimately ended the Roman Republic and led to the rise of the Roman Empire under Augustus in 27 BC. During the late Republican civil wars, many generals raised and numbered their own legions independently, often disregarding existing conventions. This led to the creation of numerous Gemina twin legions, combinations of two understrength legions merged into a single formation. These composite legions were later formalized under the command of a legatus and 6 subordinate duces, commanders. Following his victory over Mark Antony, Augustus inherited nearly 50 legions, including several with duplicate numbers, such as multiple Legio XX. For both political stability and financial sustainability, he reduced the number to 28 legions, though this number dropped to 25 after the catastrophic Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where 3 Roman legions were annihilated by Germanic tribes. Alongside this restructuring, Augustus implemented significant military reforms. He standardized soldiers' pay and significantly expanded the auxiliary forces until they matched the legionaries in number. He also founded 2 key permanent institutions, the Praetorian Guard, tasked with protecting the emperor, and the Roman Navy, manned in part by liberty, freed slaves. During this period, legions became permanent, professional units rather than temporary forces raised for specific campaigns. Each was stationed in a fixed location with a permanent legionary fortress, Castra Legionaria. Augustus's reforms proved to be both effective and sustainable, and subsequent emperors largely followed his model. New legions were cautiously added over time, depending on military necessity and the resources available, eventually stabilizing the standing army at about 30 legions. The philosopher Favorinus is said to have quipped, "It is useless to argue with the man who commands 30 legions." According to the historian Tacitus, each legion was supported by an equal number of auxiliary troops, giving a typical legionary force a total strength of around 11,000 men. Elite legions, or those stationed in hostile regions, might have even larger auxiliary support. By the reign of Emperor Septimius Severus, 193 to 211 AD, the proportion of auxiliaries had grown to make up 55 to 60% of the Roman military, approximately 250,000 out of 447,000 troops. In some cases, reinforcement units may have raised a legion's total strength to 15,000 to 16,000 men, comparable to a modern military division. Throughout the imperial period, the legions remained powerful political forces. Their loyalty could determine the fate of emperors and aspirants alike. A notable example is the Year of the Four Emperors, 69 AD, when the support of the Danubian legions ultimately secured the throne for Vespasian by defeating Vitellius. Under the empire, legions were standardized, each with its own emblem, traditions, and storied history that fostered pride among its soldiers. A legion was led by a legate, legatus, usually a senator in his 30s, appointed to a 3-year term. Directly beneath him were 6 military tribunes. 5 served as senior staff officers, while the 6th was a nobleman on a path to the Senate, and originally the legion's commander in earlier times. The legion's command also included a range of specialized officers: the praefectus castrorum, camp prefect, medical personnel, engineers, record keepers, and various religious and ceremonial roles, including priests and musicians. This professional and hierarchical structure helped maintain the Roman legions as one of the most effective and enduring military forces in history. In the Roman army, the rank-and-file legionary was the backbone of the legion. He earned a base wage of 10 asses per day, or around 225 denarii per year. But above him stood a complex and disciplined hierarchy of officers, forged through experience, politics, and the needs of an ever-expanding empire. Let's start at the top. During the late Republic and into the early imperial period, the highest-ranking officer was the legatus Augusti pro praetore, the imperial legate. This man was not only a military commander, often in charge of multiple legions, but also the provincial governor, where his troops were stationed. He was of senatorial rank, appointed by the emperor himself, and typically served for 3 to 5 years. Next came the legatus legionis, the legionary legate. He commanded a single legion and was also a senator, appointed by the emperor. In provinces with only one legion, he held dual authority as both military commander and governor. He also had control over the auxiliary units attached to his legion, though they weren't officially part of his command. Just beneath him was the tribunus laticlavius, or broadband tribune. His name came from the broad purple stripe on his tunic, a mark of senatorial class. Often young and relatively inexperienced, he served as second in command. Though technically next in line, in battle he would usually defer to more experienced officers. Still, if the legate were to fall, the tribune would assume command. Third in command was the praefectus castrorum, or camp prefect. Unlike the senators and noblemen above him, this was a man who had worked his way up through the ranks. A seasoned veteran, typically a former primus pilus, he was responsible for training, fort operations, and logistics. Despite his lower social status, he outranked even the junior tribunes. Speaking of those, each legion had 5 tribuni angusticlavi, or narrow-band tribunes. They were equestrians, men of the knightly class, with prior military experience. These officers mainly handled administrative duties, and for many, this role served as an entry point into a political or military career. Now, we move to the heart of the Roman army, the centurions. A centurion was far more than a mere officer. He was a battlefield commander, a drill master, and a disciplinarian. Each legion had 59 or 60 of them, 1 per century. At the very top of this group stood the primus pilus, the first spear. He commanded the first century of the first cohort and was the highest-ranking centurion in the entire legion. In battle, he led not only his century, but the whole first cohort. After completing his service, a primus pilus could be promoted to praefectus castrorum and often entered the equestrian order. His pay? 60 times that of a regular soldier. Just below him were the pilus prior centurions. These men led the first century of each cohort and commanded the full cohort during battle. Though subordinate to the primus pilus, they were highly respected and often veterans promoted through the ranks. Also within the first cohort were the primi ordines, the senior 5 centurions, including the primus pilus. They received 30 times the base wage and held more authority than centurions in other cohorts. Each century within a cohort had its own hierarchy. The centuries retained old names like hastati, principes, and triarii, reflecting Rome's traditional 3-line battle formation, though by now the titles were largely symbolic. Beneath the centurions were the specialist roles and standard duty positions. Each centurion had a deputy known as an optio, chosen from the ranks to act as second in command. Options earned double pay and were trusted aides on and off the battlefield. Supporting the optio was the tesserarius, responsible for guard duty and watchwords. He acted as a kind of operations assistant and earned 1.5 times the basic pay. A decurion led a cavalry unit called a turma, usually comprising 10 to 30 horsemen. Meanwhile, the smallest unit of infantry, the contubernium, was led by a decanus. This group of 8 soldiers shared a tent and supplies, and 2 non-combatants assisted them with daily life. Now let's look at the special roles, positions of great responsibility and honor. The aquilifer was one of the most prestigious posts in the legion. He carried the legion's sacred eagle standard, the aquila. Losing this symbol was considered the ultimate disgrace. Only the most reliable veterans were entrusted with this role. Each century had a signifer, the standard bearer of the signum, a symbol representing that specific unit. The signifer also served as the unit's banker and financial officer. The cornicen, or hornblower, worked alongside the signifer to deliver audible commands and direct attention in battle. From the reign of Augustus onward, another symbolic figure appeared, the imaginifer. He carried a standard bearing the image of the emperor, reinforcing loyalty to Rome's supreme leader. Some soldiers became immunes, specialists exempt from menial labor and fatigue duties. These included engineers, medics, blacksmiths, drill instructors, artillery crews, and military police. Though removed from routine duties, immunes were still trained for combat and could be deployed to the front when needed. Lastly, the avocatus, a veteran who had earned his discharge but chose to re-enlist. These men were respected and experienced. They received double pay and were typically spared from routine tasks like construction or guard rotations. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this dive into the Roman military, give the video a thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe for more history brought to life. Share your thoughts or questions in the comments. I'd love to hear what you'd like to see next. Until then, Vale, and see you in the next campaign.